Okay, keeping with the subject of politics, I want to talk about leaders slash politicians slash political activists who think that being plain talking means being crude and just disrespectful. I think there is a fine line on this. There is a sort of tendency for, particularly in democracies, people to view standard politicians in a negative light because they feel that they are sort of led by spin doctors and that they toe the line in a sense, especially towing party lines. And this is understandable. I do feel that there is a problem with sometimes politicians look like they're autocured in a sense, if that's the right word. Autocured is up with the nails. I'm probably using the wrong word there, but pedicured even, um, in a sense of kind of being molded by spin doctors and the campaign team and so on to appear almost like Stepford wives, and I think that is problematic. So, in one sense, it is refreshing for voters to hear candidates who are plain speaking. I personally don't like political correctness, and I don't like when politicians try to please everyone all the time. I don't think that is the right way to be because it looks insincere, and I think that reflects badly. So, partly as a response to this, there has been an emergence, certainly in the Western world, with Donald Trump, but also elsewhere. And the other figure I would quote is Rodrigo Duterte, the new president of the Philippines. Now, both Trump and Duterte, and I'm going to focus particularly on them too because they're prominent at the moment, have kind of made a name for themselves by being very outspoken and not for the right reasons. Yet both retain extremely loyal fan bases. I want to discuss this a little bit because I think it is an interesting subject. It's also slightly concerning because, in my view, they're both demagogues, in my opinion. Um, and this is not an endorsement, by the way, of their political opponents, it's just to focus on them. Firstly, with Trump, and I'm actually not going to focus too much on this because I've already said a lot, but Trump comes out with sweeping statements and then he doesn't take responsibility for them. He always blames the media and says it was taken out of context. The thing about Donald Trump is that, to me, that doesn't expose media bias, although certainly there is media bias, but it just shows Trump's complete terrible credentials as a candidate. People can say he's a strong businessman and all the rest of it, but in my opinion, if you're running for president of the United States, the most powerful job in the world, you need to be responsible for the things that you say. And it is true that Clinton has come out with some pretty damaging rhetoric as well. But the difference is she has taken responsibility for it and apologised for it. And I'm not endorsing Clinton with that statement. I'm just saying it is true that she takes responsibility in a way that Trump doesn't. What Trump does is he just turns around and blames the media. The media does have a lot to answer for in terms of bias. It is true, for example, that CNN has, for the most part, been extremely pro Clinton in this campaign cycle. And they are culpable to some extent, but only to some extent. There are certain things that someone like Donald Trump says he can't shy away from. And there is an expression, I'm not sure if it's used in the States, but we use it here in the UK, straight from the horse's mouth. There's certain things that Trump has said, and he can't get away from them because everyone has seen it. These are live rallies. We live in a 24-hour um, situation where when someone says something, it's not a case of it being on some transcript that's been misquoted or something, or maybe some rogue journalist has caused trouble. When you're saying something to thousands of people, that goes out there and people hear it. So Trump has said things that are inflammatory, and it could well be that he doesn't mean it to be inflammatory, but to me that's not good either way. At best, it demonstrates that he has no control over his own rhetoric. At worst, if he really does mean the things he says, then he is a demagogue. Because if he's saying things like the Mexicans are bringing rapists over here, it's no good saying 5 minutes later, oh, but by the way, some of them are good. that sort of rhetoric has an impact, and I think it does matter. Um, so no good just blaming the media and saying I was misinterpreted. I think when you're running at that level, you need to be responsible for your words. The same with Rodrigo Duterte. He has said things in Tagalog, in his language, and then turned around and blamed the media for misinterpreting him. But he has said things in English that he can't get away from. This is a man who has compared himself to Hitler. Apparently, it was in the context that critics had compared him to Hitler, and he was just getting on top of that by saying, "Well, if I'm like Hitler, then I'm going to kill 3 million addicts." But even if he was responding in context to something his critics had said, you don't make that sort of analogy. If anything, you'd want to get away from the analogy instead of endorsing it, which is what Duterte was doing. I think that's insulting to Jewish victims of the Holocaust by making that sort of analogy. Secondly, the fact that Duterte doesn't seem to differentiate between top drug lords and drug addicts is a very serious problem. Anyone, frankly, who can't see why that's an issue is an idiot. There's a world of difference between top drug dealers, top drug kingpins, and teenagers who are abusing drugs, because they've been hooked onto it by peer pressure or whatever. There's a world of difference. This is a president who is calling for extra. I think he's actually possibly more dangerous than Trump. Um, because what's happening in the Philippines right now, 3,500 people have died since July. Now, I don't know how that compares to the figures before, but that's a lot of people. And look at what happened in Mexico. It turned into a full blown war when Calderon announced the war on drugs. My own position on this is that yes, you have to take a hard line against drug dealers, drug lords. I have no problem with that. These are despicable people who are destroying lives. So I have no sympathy with drug lords. Let me be very clear about that. But when you have a head of state calling for vigilantism, that is utterly reckless. And Duterte is behaving like a demagogue. And if that wasn't bad enough, his response to the criticism is not just to defend his position, it's just to outright insult all the world leaders. He's insulted the European Union, he's insulted Barack Obama on several occasions. Um, if I was a Filipino, I wouldn't be boasting about this man, I'd be embarrassed by him. It's nothing to boast about, because frankly, President Duterte doesn't look like a strong leader, he looks like a petulant little demagogue. And I know there's many Filipinos who agree with me. I'm well aware in my previous video on this, I got a lot of thumbs down. So be it. I was speaking candidly, and I think Duterte behaves like a demagogue. Um, time will tell if his approach is going to help the Philippines or not. Um, but I do believe it is reckless for a head of state to be basically advocating vigilantism. And it's not helpful when that same head of state tells another world leader to go to hell, especially a world leader that is a major ally of the Philippines. So maybe this is part of Duterte's plan to get closer to China. I don't know. But all I can say is the next time there's a major devastating typhoon in the Philippines, they're going to need US aid. And the Americans will probably give it to them. I hope they do, because, it shouldn't be the normal Filipino people who are paying the price of the stupidity of the president. But this is not good for diplomacy. And I understand that the Philippines doesn't want to look like an American puppet. I totally understand that argument. But you can look like a strong leader without simply insulting other world leaders. So, and the same goes for Trump. I don't know why these guys think it is strength by just being crude and disrespectful to anyone who criticizes you. The way to deal with criticism is simply to counter it and say, well, you're wrong in this regard, and this is why I'm doing X, Y, and Z. It's not to just throw out playground taunts, because if your opponent is throwing taunts at you, then they're going to look petulant. But if you respond by giving in depth, strong responses and saying, well, you're wrong, and this is why you're wrong, rather than just throwing back mud, you look stronger. Trump and Duterte, in my opinion, don't look strong. They look like idiots, quite frankly. I don't think they look very capable. I think they look like idiots who, and I'm aware that Duterte, has a strong reputation in Davao City. There's a difference between one city and a whole country. of 100 million people. And time will tell. I hope I'm wrong. And they're not the only examples. Occasionally, Putin's done this. Um, I'm not saying that politicians should be squeaky clean. I do think there's times when leaders should be outspoken. I mean, in America, I do think that Obama and Clinton are wrong not to use the word Islamist terror. So I do think there are times when leaders can be blunt, but being blunt is not the same as just insulting fellow world leaders. And take, for example, issues like human rights. If I was, let's say I was British Prime Minister, I would be outspoken. I would be saying to, for example, the Chinese, look, we believe in press freedom, we believe in freedom of expression, and we are not comfortable with you persecuting dissidents. But I wouldn't insult Xi Jinping and, call him names. That's not the way to go about diplomacy. Um, and there are leaders in the world who I disagree with quite strongly in certain areas, but I respect because I think that they look diplomatic in a way that is extremely important. An example would be Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau is more centre left than myself. I don't agree with all of his positions, but I do believe he's a man who knows how to be a diplomatic statesman, and I give him credit for that. I believe Hillary Clinton knows how to do that. And this isn't a case of whether I agree with their politics or not. I just think that perception is extremely important. And there's right wing figures I believe are very diplomatic. To their credit, Mike Pence, based on tonight's performance. Um, and there's other examples. Theresa May. I think Theresa May is very diplomatic. I certainly don't agree with all of her positions or with her party. But in my opinion, being strong is not about being crude and behaving like a demagogue. It's about getting a good balance. Yes, there are times you have to be outspoken, and it shouldn't be a case of always sugarcoating language. So, yes, there's times when you need to, I mean, for example, calling ISIS a barbaric death cult is saying it like it is. But telling another world leader to go to hell is not diplomatic. It's just not. So, let me know your thoughts. This isn't about left and right. This isn't about conservative and liberal or anything like that. It's about perception. And I believe that certain leaders just gave out even that's why so many Republicans are reluctant to support Trump, because they know that he looks like an embarrassment to their party. And that's why I believe Hillary Clinton's going to win this year. Because she is far less polarizing for her party than Trump is for his party, in my opinion. As for Duterte in the Philippines, I know there's a lot of Filipinos who are loyal to them. By the way, there are many Filipinos who share my views and they are embarrassed by him. And I see this because, Filipinos are very active in cyberspace, and I see many Filipinos saying things like, please don't think this man represents all of us. So this idea that when Filipinos come out with things like, or when hardline Duterte supporters come out with like, all the Filipinos love him, no, they don't. That's just not the case. So at the very least, if you support Duterte's policies, at the very least, acknowledge that his rhetoric isn't particularly helpful.